It began as a hushed conversation behind Kensington Palace walls, one that aides tried to downplay and courtiers quickly silenced. But the look on Catherine, Princess of Wales's face as she exited that private meeting said everything the palace couldn't. Something was wrong. And it involved more than just protocol. What was first dismissed as a rumor soon turned into a royal firestorm, now confirmed by the very lawyers entrusted to protect it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What unfolded in that room was not an ordinary briefing, nor a routine discussion about royal assets. Reports suggest that Prince William sat beside Catherine as senior legal advisors carefully outlined a decision that had already been sealed long before this meeting ever took place. At the center of it all was something deeply symbolic, something that carried emotional weight far beyond its material value: the sapphires once worn by Diana, Princess of Wales. Those familiar with royal inheritance structures whisper that this was not simply about jewelry, but about a carefully orchestrated preservation of legacy. Palace aides, unusually restrained, were instructed to maintain silence, a signal that what had just been confirmed carried consequences that extended well beyond the private chamber. Catherine's composure, though steady, reportedly masked the gravity of the moment. While early whispers hinted that this legal confirmation would disrupt long-held expectations tied to Meghan Markle. But the chilling truth wasn't just about jewelry, it was about inheritance, authority, and a legacy that had quietly shifted hands. It began as a hushed conversation behind Kensington Palace walls, one that aides tried to downplay and courtiers quickly silenced. But the look on Catherine, Princess of Wales's face as she exited that private meeting said everything the palace couldn't. Something was wrong. And it involved more than just protocol. What was first dismissed as a rumor soon turned into a royal firestorm, now confirmed by the very lawyers entrusted to protect it. Long before this moment, long before the quiet confirmation that sent ripples through royal circles, the sapphires themselves had already lived a life shaped by devotion and memory. They were never just adornments. They were symbols, anchors to a past that continues to shape the present. Those who have studied the emotional architecture of the monarchy often point to Diana's sapphire engagement ring as one of the most powerful modern relics within the royal collection. It carried with it not only the story of a marriage, but the enduring public connection to Diana herself, a figure whose legacy refuses to fade. When that ring passed into the hands of William and later on to Catherine, it was widely seen as a natural continuation of that story. Yet insiders have long suggested that such transitions are never as simple as they appear. Beneath the surface, questions lingered about ownership, about intention, about whether the symbolic weight of those sapphires might one day be shared or reinterpreted. Over time, Catherine's association with Diana's legacy grew stronger, not through declarations, but through quiet consistency. Public appearances, subtle choices, and a deep alignment with royal protocol all reinforced the idea that she was not merely wearing history, she was carrying it forward. But the chilling truth wasn't just about jewelry, it was about inheritance, authority, and a legacy that had quietly shifted hands. It began as a hushed conversation behind Kensington Palace walls, one that aides tried to downplay and courtiers quickly silenced. But the look on Catherine, Princess of Wales's face as she exited that private meeting said everything the palace couldn't. Something was wrong. And it involved more than just protocol. What was first dismissed as a rumor soon turned into a royal firestorm, now confirmed by the very lawyers entrusted to protect it. For years, assumptions moved quietly through royal discourse, rarely spoken aloud but widely understood. Various interpretations of earlier events suggest that Prince Harry may have once held possession of Diana's sapphire ring before it was given to William, a gesture often framed as an act of brotherly trust. Yet within that narrative, another layer began to take shape, one tied to expectations that extended beyond tradition. Observers and commentators alike speculated that Meghan's arrival into the royal family introduced new dynamics, new perspectives on what legacy could mean in a modern context. Reports suggest that comparisons between Catherine and Meghan were not only fueled by media narratives but quietly amplified by differing roles within the institution itself. While Catherine's path aligned closely with established protocol, Meghan's approach was often described as more independent, more willing to challenge tradition. Over time, these differences created a subtle but growing tension, particularly when it came to symbols as powerful as Diana's belongings. What began as unspoken expectation gradually evolved into something more complex, a question of who truly held the right to carry forward Diana's legacy. But the chilling truth wasn't just about jewelry, it was about inheritance, authority, and a legacy that had quietly shifted hands. It began as a hushed conversation behind Kensington Palace walls, one that aides tried to downplay and courtiers quickly silenced. But the look on Catherine, Princess of Wales's face as she exited that private meeting said everything the palace couldn't. Something was wrong, and it involved more than just protocol. What was first dismissed as a rumor soon turned into a royal firestorm, now confirmed by the very lawyers entrusted to protect it. The confirmation itself did not arrive with spectacle. There were no public statements, no ceremonial declarations. Instead, it emerged through legal clarity, quiet, precise, and final. Sources familiar with royal legal frameworks suggest that the Sapphires were never in question from an institutional perspective. Their placement, their custodianship, had been carefully determined in alignment with the future of the monarchy. At the center of this structure stood King Charles III, whose role, though often described as conflicted, remains bound by the responsibility to preserve continuity. Legal advisors reportedly outlined the framework in unmistakable terms. The Sapphires, as part of Diana's enduring legacy, were to remain within the direct line of succession, reinforcing the position of William and Catherine as the future of the crown. In that moment, speculation gave way to certainty. The weight of expectation built over years was quietly set aside in favor of a decision rooted in protocol and precedent. But the chilling truth wasn't just about jewelry, it was about inheritance, authority, and a legacy that had quietly shifted hands. It began as a hushed conversation behind Kensington Palace walls, one that aides tried to downplay and courtiers quickly silenced. But the look on Catherine, Princess of Wales's face as she exited that private meeting said everything the palace couldn't. Something was wrong, and it involved more than just protocol. What was first dismissed as a rumor soon turned into a royal firestorm, now confirmed by the very lawyers entrusted to protect it. Across the Atlantic, the implications of that decision did not go unnoticed. Insiders whisper that Meghan's reaction was shaped not only by the outcome itself but by the sudden clarity it brought. What had once existed as possibility was now definitively closed. Reports suggest that this moment reignited broader conversations about her relationship with the royal institution, conversations that had never fully settled. The emotional weight of Diana's legacy, combined with the public narratives that had surrounded it, created a situation where the legal confirmation carried personal resonance. Media coverage quickly amplified the story, framing it as yet another chapter in an ongoing divide. Yet those familiar with the inner workings of the monarchy caution against oversimplification. They suggest that what appears as conflict is often the result of deeply embedded structures, systems that prioritize continuity above all else. Still, the perception of being blindsided, whether fully accurate or not, added a new layer to an already complex dynamic. But the chilling truth wasn't just about jewelry, it was about inheritance, authority, and a legacy that had quietly shifted hands. It began as a hushed conversation behind Kensington Palace walls, one that aides tried to downplay and courtiers quickly silenced. But the look on Catherine, Princess of Wales's face as she exited that private meeting said everything the palace couldn't. Something was wrong. And it involved more than just protocol. What was first dismissed as a rumor soon turned into a royal firestorm, now confirmed by the very lawyers entrusted to protect it. Within the monarchy, emotion may influence perception, but protocol determines reality. This principle, often invisible to the public, shapes decisions in ways that can appear cold or calculated from the outside. Catherine's role as Princess of Wales places her at the center of this structure, not as an individual seeking legacy, but as a figure entrusted with preserving it. The Sapphires, in this context, become more than personal inheritance, they become institutional assets, tied to the future of the crown itself. Those familiar with royal precedent note that such decisions are rarely about preference. They are about alignment with a long-standing system designed to ensure continuity across generations. In this system, hierarchy is not merely symbolic, it is operational. And in that operation, Catherine's position carries a weight that cannot be easily redistributed. But the chilling truth wasn't just about jewelry, it was about inheritance, authority, and a legacy that had quietly shifted hands. It began as a hushed conversation behind Kensington Palace walls, one that aides tried to downplay and courtiers quickly silenced. But the look on Catherine, Princess of Wales's face as she exited that private meeting said everything the palace couldn't. Something was wrong, and it involved more than just protocol. What was first dismissed as a rumor soon turned into a royal firestorm, now confirmed by the very lawyers entrusted to protect it. To the public, the story unfolded as another headline, another moment in the ongoing narrative of the royal family. But within palace walls, it represented something far more significant, a reaffirmation of order. Catherine's growing association with stability, with continuity, has not been accidental. It has been shaped over years of adherence to protocol, of quiet alignment with the expectations placed upon her role. In contrast, Meghan's path has taken her beyond those structures, into a space where legacy is interpreted differently. These contrasting trajectories have inevitably influenced public perception, creating a narrative that often simplifies what is, in reality, deeply complex. Yet, even as opinions shift and narratives evolve, the underlying structure remains unchanged. The monarchy moves forward, guided not by headlines, but by a framework that has endured for generations. But the chilling truth wasn't just about jewelry, it was about inheritance, authority, and a legacy that had quietly shifted hands. It began as a hushed conversation behind Kensington Palace walls, one that aides tried to downplay and courtiers quickly silenced. But the look on Catherine, Princess of Wales's face as she exited that private meeting said everything the palace couldn't. Something was wrong. And it involved more than just protocol. What was first dismissed as a rumor soon turned into a royal firestorm, now confirmed by the very lawyers entrusted to protect it. In the end, the story returns to where it began, not with conflict, but with legacy. The sapphires, once worn by Diana, now firmly positioned within Catherine's custodianship, represent a continuity that extends beyond individual expectation. They symbolize a line that moves forward, steady and unbroken, shaped by decisions that are often made far from public view. For William and Catherine, this moment reinforces their place at the center of the monarchy's future. For others, it serves as a reminder that within this institution, legacy is not negotiated, it is assigned, preserved, and protected with unwavering precision. And as the quiet echoes of that private meeting continue to ripple outward, one truth settles into place with unmistakable clarity. Within the monarchy, nothing of true significance is ever left to chance. Long before headlines and tension, the sapphires carried a story of devotion, loss, and symbolic power, one deeply tied to the memory of Diana, Princess of Wales. Their significance was never confined to the brilliance of the stones or the elegance of their design. Instead, they became a quiet language within the monarchy, a way of communicating continuity, emotion, and an unspoken promise that certain legacies would endure even as everything else changed. Those who followed the royal story closely often point to the moment Diana first wore that sapphire engagement ring as more than a personal milestone. It became an image etched into public consciousness, a symbol that transcended the boundaries of the institution itself. And when that chapter ended so abruptly, the weight of that symbol did not disappear. It lingered, carried forward not just in memory, but in the very objects that remained behind. Over time, reports suggest that these pieces were carefully preserved, not merely as heirlooms, but as artifacts of meaning, items that would one day find their place in the evolving narrative of the royal family. As years passed, the sapphires began their quiet transition, moving from one chapter of history into another. When Prince William inherited the ring, it was widely interpreted as a deeply personal gesture, one rooted in remembrance rather than obligation. Yet within the structure of the monarchy, even the most personal decisions often carry institutional weight. Insiders whisper that this moment marked the beginning of a new phase, one where the legacy of Diana would be carefully aligned with the future of the crown. And when that same ring was later placed into the hands of Catherine, Princess of Wales, the symbolism intensified. It was no longer just about memory, it became about continuity. Catherine did not simply receive a piece of jewelry, she inherited a narrative, one that connected her directly to the emotional history of the monarchy. Observers noted how naturally this transition seemed to unfold, as though it had always been intended. as though the sapphires themselves had found their rightful place. But beneath that surface of seamless continuity, a deeper layer of meaning was taking shape. The sapphires were no longer passive symbols, they became active markers of legitimacy. Within royal circles, where tradition and hierarchy operate with quiet precision, such objects carry implications that extend far beyond sentiment. They signal alignment, reinforce roles, and, perhaps most importantly, define who stands at the center of the institution's future. Over time, Catherine's association with Diana's legacy strengthened, not through dramatic declarations, but through consistency. Public appearances, subtle choices, and an unwavering adherence to royal expectations gradually positioned her as the natural bearer of that legacy. Reports suggest that this alignment was not accidental. It reflected a broader effort to preserve continuity, to ensure that the emotional connection Diana once represented would remain anchored within the direct line of succession. Yet even as this narrative solidified in the public eye, it did not unfold in isolation. Different interpretations of palace dynamics reveal that such transitions are rarely without tension. While the world saw a story of tradition being honored, those closer to the institution understood that expectations were forming behind the scenes. Questions lingered, unspoken but persistent, about what these symbols meant for others within the royal sphere. The sapphires, once a personal emblem of love and loss, had evolved into something far more complex, a focal point in a broader conversation about legacy, identity, and the future of the monarchy itself. And as these layers of meaning continued to build, it became increasingly clear that the story was far from settled. Because while the public embraced the image of continuity, the reality unfolding behind palace doors was far more intricate, shaped by perspectives and ambitions that did not always align. But while the world saw tradition unfolding naturally, behind palace doors, expectations were quietly forming, and not everyone would accept the outcome. For years, assumptions lingered beneath the surface unspoken, but deeply felt about who would ultimately claim a piece of Diana's most treasured legacy. They were never written into official records, never acknowledged in formal statements, yet they moved quietly through conversations, shaping perceptions and expectations in ways that were impossible to ignore. Among the most persistent of these narratives were reports suggesting that Prince Harry had once been the original holder of the sapphire engagement ring, a detail that, if true, added a layer of emotional complexity to everything that followed. Those familiar with the story often interpret that moment as one rooted in trust, a private exchange between brothers that carried far more meaning than the public ever fully understood. But within the framework of the monarchy, even the most personal gestures rarely remain isolated. They evolve, they are reinterpreted, and eventually they become part of a much larger story, one that extends beyond individual intention. As time moved forward and Prince William proposed to Catherine, Princess of Wales, using that same sapphire ring, the narrative seemed to settle into place, at least on the surface. It appeared as though the legacy of Diana, Princess of Wales, had found a natural continuation, seamlessly transitioning into the next chapter of the royal story. Yet beneath that sense of closure, another set of expectations began to form, less visible, but no less powerful. Speculation gradually emerged, suggesting that Meghan, upon entering the royal family, may have envisioned a different interpretation of how Diana's legacy could be shared. Whether grounded in reality or amplified by external narratives, these expectations became part of the broader conversation, feeding into a growing sense that the story was not as settled as it appeared. What had once been seen as a simple transition now carried the weight of possibility, of what might have been, of what some believed should have unfolded differently. The media, as it often does, played a significant role in shaping these perceptions. Comparisons between Catherine and Meghan Markle became increasingly frequent, framed not just in terms of personality or public role, but in relation to their connection to Diana's memory. These narratives, repeated and refined over time, began to create a subtle but unmistakable divide. On one side stood Catherine, steadily embodying continuity, her association with Diana's legacy reinforced through consistency and alignment with royal tradition. On the other side stood Meghan, whose approach was often described as more independent, more willing to challenge the boundaries of what the monarchy represented. Neither position was inherently defined by the sapphires themselves, Yet the symbolism attached to those pieces inevitably pulled them into the center of this evolving dynamic. What might have remained a private matter gradually became a public point of tension, shaped as much by perception as by reality. Behind palace walls, those tensions did not simply disappear. Reports suggest that the growing distance between royal households was influenced by more than just differences in approach. It was shaped by the accumulation of moments, of interpretations, of expectations that were never fully aligned. The sapphires, in this context, became more than objects. They became focal points, carrying emotional and symbolic weight that extended into relationships themselves. For some, they represented continuity and stability. For others, they symbolized exclusion, a reminder of how legacy within the monarchy is often defined not by sentiment, but by structure. And as these layers of meaning continued to build, the story grew more complex, more difficult to reduce to simple explanations. Because at its core, this was never just about who held a piece of jewelry. It was about what that possession represented, about the roles it reinforced, about the narratives it shaped. And yet, for all the speculation, for all the assumptions that had taken root over the years, there remained one unavoidable truth. None of it carried the weight of certainty. Assumptions can influence perception, they can guide expectations, but they cannot determine outcome. Within the monarchy, where tradition and protocol operate with quiet authority, decisions are rarely left to interpretation. They are defined, documented, and ultimately enforced in ways that leave little room for ambiguity. The emotional stakes may be high, the narratives may be compelling, but when the moment of clarity arrives, it does so with unmistakable precision. And as the whispers grew louder, as the layers of speculation reached their peak, it became increasingly clear that something decisive was approaching, something that would move the story beyond assumption and into undeniable reality. But assumptions, no matter how widely believed, mean little when confronted with legal reality, and that reality was about to surface. It wasn't a public announcement or a grand ceremony, but a quiet legal confirmation that carried the weight of finality. There were no cameras, no carefully worded press releases, no moment designed for public consumption. Instead, it unfolded behind closed doors, where decisions of real consequence are often made. Reports suggest that senior royal lawyers, individuals deeply familiar with the intricate framework governing royal inheritance, are often called upon to advise on matters of state, laid out the conclusion with unmistakable clarity. The sapphires, long surrounded by speculation and expectation, were never truly in question from a legal standpoint. Their placement had been determined within a structure that prioritizes continuity above all else. And in that structure, Catherine, Princess of Wales, was identified not simply as a recipient, but as the rightful custodian, an outcome rooted in precedent rather than preference. Those familiar with the monarchy's internal systems often describe these moments as the point where narrative collides with reality. For years, assumptions had been allowed to grow, shaped by emotion, perception, and the ever-present influence of public discourse. Yet within the legal architecture of the royal institution, such assumptions hold little authority. Documentation, carefully constructed and rigorously maintained, tells a different story, one that is less fluid, less open to interpretation. Insiders whisper that these documents, tied to long-established protocols and inheritance structures, leave very little room for deviation. They define not just ownership, but responsibility. They determine where legacy resides, and perhaps more importantly, who is entrusted to carry it forward. In this case, that trust was clearly placed within the line of succession, reinforcing a continuity that had been quietly building over time. At the center of this framework stands King Charles III, a figure often described as navigating a delicate balance between personal sentiment and institutional duty. Various interpretations of his role suggest that while he may be aware of the emotional complexities surrounding such decisions, his responsibility ultimately lies with preserving the stability of the crown. Continuity is not merely a principle, it is an obligation. And in moments like this, that obligation demands clarity, even when the outcome may challenge existing expectations. By allowing the legal process to proceed without interference, Charles is said to have reinforced a message that has defined the monarchy for generations. That legacy is governed by structure, not by circumstance. It is a system that does not bend easily, and one that resists the influence of shifting narratives. As the legal confirmation settled into place, its implications became impossible to ignore. The position of Prince William and Catherine as the future of the monarchy was not merely acknowledged, it was reinforced. The sapphires, as symbols of Diana's enduring legacy, were now firmly aligned with that future, their significance extending far beyond their physical presence. They became markers of direction, indicators of where the monarchy is heading and who will lead it. For those who had followed the story closely, this moment marked a turning point, a transition from uncertainty to certainty, from speculation to resolution. Yet even as clarity emerged, it did not erase the tensions that had built along the way. Instead, it cast them in a new light, revealing the distance between expectation and reality. And perhaps that is where the true weight of this moment lies, not in the decision itself, but in what it represents. A quiet confirmation delivered without spectacle, yet carrying consequences that ripple far beyond the room in which it was made. Because in the world of the monarchy, silence often speaks louder than any declaration. It signals that something definitive has occurred, something that will shape the narrative moving forward, even if it is never openly discussed. And as those ripples begin to spread, touching relationships, perceptions, and the broader public conversation, one thing becomes increasingly clear. The story is far from over. And while the palace maintained its silence, the ripple effects of that decision were already beginning to spread. Across the Atlantic, the confirmation didn't go unnoticed, and according to insiders, the response was immediate. What had been quietly settled within the structured walls of the monarchy began to echo far beyond them, reaching a very different world where distance did nothing to soften its impact. Reports suggest that Meghan Markle was caught off guard by the finality of the decision, not necessarily because the possibility had never been considered, but because of how definitively it closed the door on any lingering uncertainty. For years, the narrative surrounding Diana, Princess of Wales's legacy, had remained fluid, shaped by emotion, memory, and the evolving dynamics within the royal family. But in that moment, fluidity gave way to structure, and possibility was replaced by something far more rigid: legal clarity that left little room for reinterpretation. Those familiar with the emotional weight attached to Diana's legacy often emphasize that it extends far beyond tradition. It carries a deeply personal resonance, particularly for those who entered the royal family at a time when her presence was no longer physical, yet still profoundly influential. Meghan's connection to that legacy, while different in form, has long been part of the broader narrative. Observers have noted how comparisons between her and Diana were not only frequent but often intensified by public perception, creating an expectation, subtle yet persistent, that some aspects of that legacy might eventually intersect with her own journey. When that expectation met the reality of the legal confirmation, the contrast was impossible to ignore. What had once been imagined as a shared symbolic space was now clearly defined within the boundaries of succession, leaving little ambiguity about where that legacy would remain anchored. The response, however, did not unfold in isolation. It quickly became part of a larger conversation, one that reignited scrutiny on the relationship between the Sussexes and the royal institution. Reports suggest that this moment served as a reminder of the structural differences that continue to shape that relationship, differences that go beyond personal dynamics and reflect fundamentally different positions within the monarchy itself. While Prince Harry and Meghan have carved out a path that exists largely outside those traditional frameworks, the institution they stepped away from continues to operate according to its own internal logic, one that prioritizes continuity and hierarchy above all else. The confirmation of Catherine's custodianship did not create that divide, but it did bring it into sharper focus, highlighting the distance between expectation and reality in a way that could not easily be dismissed. As the story spread, media coverage amplified every layer of the narrative, framing it as yet another chapter in an ongoing divide that has captured global attention. Headlines leaned into contrast, into tension, into the emotional implications of what had occurred. Yet those closer to the inner workings of the monarchy caution that such portrayals often oversimplify a far more complex reality. They suggest that while personal reactions may carry emotional weight, they exist within a system that is not easily altered by sentiment alone. The monarchy, by its very nature, operates on principles that resist rapid change, favoring stability over flexibility, tradition over reinterpretation. And in moments like this, those principles become particularly visible, shaping outcomes in ways that can feel abrupt, even unforgiving, to those on the outside. Still, the implications of the confirmation continue to unfold, extending beyond immediate reactions into the realm of future interactions. Questions linger, not necessarily about what has been decided, but about how that decision will influence the evolving dynamic between both sides. Will it deepen existing distances or simply reinforce boundaries that were already in place? Will it alter perceptions or merely confirm what many had already begun to suspect? These questions remain open, their answers shaped by time rather than immediate response. And as the narrative continues to develop, one thing becomes increasingly clear. This moment is not an isolated event, but part of a broader pattern, one that reflects the enduring tension between personal expectation and institutional reality. But beyond personal reactions, something deeper was unfolding, a quiet reinforcement of the monarchy's internal order. In the royal family, emotion may shake narratives, but protocol determines outcomes. It is a truth that often remains hidden beneath the surface, overshadowed by the human stories that capture public attention. Yet within the monarchy, protocol is not simply a set of guidelines, it is the foundation upon which every decision is built. Those familiar with its inner workings often describe it as an invisible force, one that quietly directs the course of events, regardless of personal sentiment. In moments of uncertainty, when expectations rise and emotions intensify, it is this structure that ultimately defines what can and cannot happen. And in the case of Catherine, Princess of Wales, that structure has positioned her at the very center of a legacy that extends far beyond individual experience. Hierarchy within the monarchy is not symbolic, it is operational. Every role carries a defined purpose. Every position a set of responsibilities that cannot be easily shifted or reinterpreted. As Princess of Wales, Catherine stands not only as a senior member of the royal family, but as the future queen, a role that comes with expectations shaped by centuries of tradition. Reports suggest that this position places her in direct alignment with the preservation of continuity, making her the natural custodian of symbols tied to the monarchy's future. The sapphires once worn by Diana, Princess of Wales, are part of that equation, not because of personal connection alone, but because of what they represent within the broader structure. They are not simply heirlooms, they are markers of legitimacy, woven into the narrative of succession in a way that leaves little room for deviation. This alignment between Catherine and the monarchy's future is not accidental. Insiders whisper that it reflects a deliberate consolidation of legacy within the direct line of succession, ensuring that the emotional and symbolic power associated with Diana remains anchored where it can reinforce continuity. At the center of this alignment stands Prince William, whose role as heir further solidifies the position of the Sapphires within his immediate family. Together, William and Catherine represent not just the next chapter of the monarchy, but its intended direction, a path shaped by tradition, reinforced by protocol, and protected by the systems that govern royal life. In this context, decisions that may appear personal are, in reality, deeply institutional, guided by principles that extend far beyond individual preference. What makes this structure particularly powerful is its resistance to external influence. Personal expectations, no matter how strongly felt, must ultimately yield to the framework that defines the monarchy. It is a system designed to endure, to maintain stability even in the face of changing circumstances. And while that stability can sometimes feel rigid, even unforgiving, it is precisely what allows the institution to continue across generations. The decision surrounding the Sapphires is a reflection of this reality, a moment where protocol did not simply guide the outcome, but dictated it. It is a reminder that within the monarchy, legacy is not distributed based on desire or interpretation. It is assigned according to a structure that has been carefully preserved over time. As this understanding begins to take shape, the broader implications become impossible to ignore. The consolidation of Diana's legacy within William's line reinforces a message that extends beyond this single moment. It underscores the enduring importance of succession, the necessity of continuity, and the role of protocol in maintaining both. For those observing from the outside, the decision may appear decisive, even final. But within the monarchy, it is part of a much larger pattern, one that continues to unfold, guided by forces that are often unseen but always present. And as the structure of the monarchy held firm, the message it sent was unmistakable. To the public, it was just another headline, but inside palace walls, it marked a defining moment. The kind of moment that doesn't announce itself loudly, yet quietly redraws the lines of influence, identity, and legacy. Outside, it was reduced to a narrative of winners and losers, of who gained and who was left behind. But those familiar with the inner workings of the monarchy suggest that what unfolded was far more complex, far more deliberate. The contrast between perception and reality has always defined royal life, and in this instance, that contrast became impossible to ignore. While headlines framed the story in terms of rivalry and reaction, the institution itself moved with calculated precision, guided not by public sentiment, but by an internal logic that rarely reveals itself fully. Within that framework, Catherine, Princess of Wales, has increasingly come to represent something far greater than her individual role. Over time, her presence has aligned with a sense of stability that the monarchy relies upon, especially in moments where uncertainty threatens to disrupt its carefully maintained balance. Observers often point to her consistency, her adherence to tradition, and her quiet acceptance of responsibility as key factors in shaping this perception. It is not a transformation that happened overnight. It has been built gradually, reinforced through choices that may seem subtle on the surface but carry significant weight within the institution. As the narrative surrounding Diana's legacy continues to evolve, Catherine's connection to that legacy has strengthened. Positioning her as a central figure in the story the monarchy is telling about its own future. In contrast, Meghan Markle's journey has taken a markedly different direction, one that exists largely outside the boundaries of traditional royal life. Her public narrative has evolved in ways that reflect independence, reinvention, and a willingness to redefine what identity looks like beyond the institution. Reports suggest that this divergence has played a significant role in shaping how both women are perceived, not only by the public but within the broader context of the monarchy itself. While Catherine's path reinforces continuity, Meghan's path highlights change. And in that contrast, the underlying tension becomes clear not necessarily as a direct conflict, but as two fundamentally different interpretations of legacy and belonging. As these narratives unfold, public perception continues to shift, influenced by the interplay between media coverage and the subtle signals sent from within palace walls. The way each woman is positioned within this evolving story speaks to something deeper than individual roles. It reflects the monarchy's ongoing effort to define itself in a changing world, to balance tradition with adaptation, to maintain relevance without losing its core identity. Legacy, in this sense, becomes more than a matter of inheritance. It becomes a lens through which the institution shapes its future, deciding not only what is preserved, but how it is presented to the world. And yet, for all the attention placed on perception, the true significance of this moment lies beneath the surface. It is found in the quiet decisions, the unspoken understandings, the structures that continue to guide the monarchy regardless of how it is portrayed externally. The contrast between Catherine and Meghan, between continuity and reinvention, between alignment and departure, is not simply a narrative constructed for public consumption. It is a reflection of deeper forces at work, forces that determine how legacy is carried forward and who is entrusted with that responsibility. As the story continues to unfold, these forces remain constant, shaping outcomes in ways that are both subtle and profound. But as perception shifted, one question lingered: what does this mean for the future of the royal legacy? In the end, it was never just about sapphires, it was about who carries the weight of history forward. What began as a quiet legal clarification slowly revealed itself as something far more profound, something rooted not in material value but in meaning, identity, and the invisible architecture of the monarchy itself. The sapphires, once worn by Diana, Princess of Wales, have now found their place within a narrative that continues to evolve, one that speaks to continuity rather than change. And at the center of that continuity stands Catherine, Princess of Wales, whose role has gradually transformed from participant to custodian, from presence to symbol. Reports suggest that this positioning was never sudden, never accidental, but the result of a steady alignment between personal conduct and institutional expectation. Over time, Catherine has come to embody a version of the monarchy that prioritizes stability, one that reflects not only where it has been, but where it intends to go. This moment, shaped quietly behind closed doors, reinforces a broader truth about the monarchy's future. It is not built on speculation or shifting narratives, but on a framework that resists uncertainty. Within that framework, Prince William and Catherine emerge not just as figures of the present, but as architects of what comes next. Their roles are defined not by individual ambition, but by a responsibility that extends beyond them, a responsibility to preserve the continuity that the institution depends upon. The sapphires in this context become more than a symbol of the past. They become markers of direction, anchoring Diana's legacy firmly within the line that will carry the monarchy forward. It is a transition that feels both inevitable and deliberate, shaped by decisions that prioritize longevity over immediacy. For those who have followed the story from its earliest whispers, this moment brings a sense of closure, though not in the way many might have expected. The speculation that once surrounded the sapphires, fueled by narratives of possibility and expectation, has now been replaced by certainty. And yet, that certainty does not erase the complexity that came before it. Instead, it reframes it, offering a clearer understanding of how legacy is managed within the monarchy. It is not something that can be claimed through proximity or sentiment. It is something that is assigned carefully and deliberately according to a structure that has been designed to endure. In this way, the outcome becomes less about resolution and more about revelation, a glimpse into the mechanisms that quietly shape the royal story. There is, within this resolution, a subtle but powerful contrast. On one side lies expectation, shaped by emotion, by perception, by the belief that legacy might be shared or reinterpreted. On the other lies protocol, steady and unyielding, defining outcomes with a clarity that leaves little room for ambiguity. The confirmation of Catherine's role represents a symbolic victory of that protocol, a reaffirmation of the principles that guide the monarchy even when they are not visible to the public eye. It is a reminder that within this institution, continuity is not negotiable. It is protected, reinforced, and carried forward through decisions that may appear quiet, but are anything but insignificant. And as this chapter settles into place, the enduring power of legacy becomes impossible to ignore. It moves through time, shaping identities, influencing decisions, and connecting past to present in ways that are both visible and unseen. The sapphires, once part of Diana's story, now belong to a larger narrative, one that continues to unfold through Catherine and William, through the roles they will assume and the responsibilities they will carry. It is a story defined not by moments of drama, but by the steady progression of tradition, by the quiet certainty of a system that has outlasted generations. And as the dust settles, one truth remains within the monarchy: legacy isn't claimed, it is carefully and quietly assigned. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.